Alright, so let's talk about chapter 6, which is going to be on Rome, ancient Rome. What are we going to do when we start off in section 1? So this is just going to be the first section here that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the geography of Rome, so how do the physical landforms and some of the patterns of the actual physical structure of the land affect the way Rome and Italy are put together. We're going to talk just a little bit about the structure of the Roman Republic, some of the initial social considerations, and then finally some of the expansion through Italy and beyond. First, I want to focus on the geography and the makeup, and it's important for us to take a look at this. We just got done studying and talking about Greece, so let's talk about some of the reasons that the Italian peninsula is a better place to settle for establishing a large political structure. Now, if you think back, the political structure we saw in Greece was city-states. You had small units, independently governed, had no greater, until really Alexander the Great really had no greater sovereign that looked over them. Okay, they were all independent. Athens had their own independent government. Sparta, Corinth, they all had their own independent government until the Delian League in the post-Persian War period, when they really had a confederation or an alliance, and then really when we talked about Alexander uniting them all into his empire, they were all independent. A lot of that was because it was broken up into a lot of small islands. There was a lot of mountains. There was a lot of valleys. Well, the Italian peninsula is much better than Greece for settling in that respect because it's not busted up and broken up in those little valleys. And the mountains, which run like a spine right down the center of Italy right here, they run right down the spine. They are not nearly as rugged. And there's a lot of broad, fertile plains, especially in the area of Rome right in here. So what does that mean? That means that they really have a larger agricultural capacity to establish a large political structure right from the beginning. In terms of who they were and what their ancestors were, they really come from a group of people known as the Latins, who really were around about 800 BC, and they're going to settle along an important river called the Tiber, and they will actually establish Rome beforehand as the city on 7 hills. And if you look at a topographical map of Rome, which I don't have here, you'll notice that there are 7 distinct topographically raised areas known as the 7 hills on which Rome is built. There's also going to be some influence by a group of people known as the Etruscans, and they're pictured here. And they're going to influence heavily the art and some of the other cultural aspects of Rome. When we talk about the Roman Republic, it's important that we take a look at how the government actually took shape. The Etruscan rule is going to be pushed out in about 509, and the actual republic will really be formed. You need to be familiar with these terms. Republic. You guys be familiar with the term republic. Every day when you come to school, you say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands. We are, in fact, a republic. What does that mean? Well, it's a representative democracy. We saw in Greece they had a direct democracy under Pericles, which means the people voted on pretty much every issue on a regular basis. Well, in a republic, you have a representative that you elect that speaks on your behalf, and then they're the ones that actually vote on the political decisions. So there's a layer of separation between you and the government in terms of who you elect to speak on your behalf. The patricians were a group of elite social people. The patricians were the wealthy. They're the ones who are going to run the courts. They're going to own the land, and they're going to be a very wealthy class that's going to be above the majority of the people. The patricians are going to control a office called the consul, and the consul there's 2 of them, and they have 2 main responsibilities. The first responsibility is they oversee the government. The second responsibility is the fact that they're in charge of actually dealing with the military. And so there's 2 consuls, and those are the 2 responsibilities they have. In terms of a dictator, modern day, especially in the United States, we have a very negative attitude towards the term dictator. It does not necessarily mean, in this case, that the person was a bad leader. That's not what it means at all. And actually, what all it means is there's someone who has complete control of the government for a limited period of time. With regard to the plebeians are going to be your lower class, your middle class, I guess we would say would be the best sort of concept. Your artisans, your merchants, your farmers, okay, and they were not very happy with the fact that patricians sort of ran everything. And they're going to push for equality, and by the time that 450 rolls around, we have something called the Laws of the 12 Tables. And what that's going to do is it's going to set up an appeals process. For those of you who are familiar with the law at all, you know if you are in a particular court and you don't like the decision, you have a right to appeal it, and it would go to an appellate court, or it would go to a higher court to then decide if there needs to be a separate decision made. Well, that's what the Law of the 12 Tables did, because the patricians, the upper class, ran and selected the judges. So if it was a plebeian versus a patrician, and it went before a judge, the patricians would typically win, and there was no recourse for them to take. Well, now, after the Laws of the 12 Tables, there is something they can do about it. A couple other terms for you. Tribune, you probably see the word tribune. You should know it from the newspaper. And the tribune serves as the voice of the people, the voice of the plebeians, and they have the right to veto certain things that come before the government, before the legislature, which means they can basically say no. Our modern day American government, the president has the right to veto legislation. So does our governor in the state of Florida. He can veto it. And then it takes a 2/3 vote in the legislature to override his veto. Eventually, the plebeians will be able to get to all levels of the government. Now, when it comes to the legacy that the Roman Republic is going to set up, it's pretty specific, especially with regard to American citizens. Many of these concepts are going to be held directly over into American government, and we could point to the Roman Republic and say this is a direct correlation. The concepts here are the people are the ones that actually have access to the power. It is a republic, it's a democracy. It's not a direct democracy, ideally like we would see the Greeks held it under Pericles. That was the idea, is that everyone can, wealthy male citizens in that case at any rate, have the right to vote on all issues. It's not really efficient, said many when founding the United States, and that a representative would better serve between the masses and the government itself. So many, again, Senate, veto, checks on political power, these things will be present at the founding of the United States. When we talk about social issues, the first thing that's important is to understand that there's a changing role of women. While the family was still the basic unit of society, and it was patriarchal, women had a larger role in Rome than they did certainly in Greece, and certainly in Athens. Think back to what people like Aristotle had to say about women and their inability to even rationalize or think reasonably, that they were flawed, that they're mentally flawed. Not the concept so much in Rome. In later Rome, they're even going to be able to run their own businesses. And while most did participate in the domestic activities we've been talking about since chapter 2 with spinning and weaving and raising children, patrician women especially had very public lives and were involved in business. When it comes to education, big change from Greece. Girls and boys both are taught to read. Even lower classes are taught to read, all right, and get an education. When it comes to the religion, their pantheon is very closely going to resemble that of Greece. The pantheon is all the gods. Pan, meaning all. Theothei, gods. All the gods is the pantheon. For example, Zeus and Jupiter have a strong correlation. Hera and Juno, Poseidon and Neptune, very strong correlation. And the festivals and temples, as they were important in Greece, serve as anchors of the community. And we see that here as well. In terms of expansion, the concept of the citizen soldier is huge in Rome. And the basic makeup of the soldier is going to be a legion, which is going to represent 5,000 people. Well, by 270 BC, basically the Romans are going to have entire control of the Italian peninsula. The citizen soldiers were Roman citizens. They received no pay for serving and were responsible for bringing their own weapons when they participated in military maneuvers. So there was a deep-seated understanding that it was not only courage, but loyalty to Rome that would make people fight. All right, they weren't being paid. That's not why they showed up. They had loyalty, and they respected the authority of Rome. They would normally be very just in the lands they conquered, at least in the typical sense. They would typically demand taxes, and that ultimate authority would pass to Rome, and soldiers would have to be garrisoned, or they'd have to be stationed in land where they conquered. But they would be allowed to keep their culture, and they would immediately make some of the people full Roman citizens. Typically, they would pick the people that were at the top of the social food chain, so then they could encourage the lower social classes to also be loyal to Rome. And marrying and trade into the Roman society in the conquered land certainly helped to bridge that gap. And they're really after loyalty from the conquered peoples, and most of the time they certainly got it. In order to protect and unify, they certainly had to post soldiers throughout, and in order to do this, they built a very elaborate system of roads. These roads were built to move the soldiers, but an added benefit certainly is that their culture spread, but more importantly, not only their culture spread, but trade will also be allowed to flourish. And there is a very vast network of roads